Before I present our speakers, I would like to set the context for today's discussion. The housing affordability crisis that is affecting urban areas across the world is common to many of our cities and regions, and it is increasing urban segregation and inequality. Policymakers, researchers, advocates, we're all looking for solutions. Today, we will talk about two policy instruments that can work together to provide permanent affordable housing. Inclusionary housing, on the one side, also referred to as inclusionary zoning, can be described as a range of policies that lead private developers to include a percentage of affordable units in their projects. Community land trusts, on the other side, are community-led land stewardship models that secure long-term affordability. But how can these two work hand in hand? Well, this is what we're going to be talking today, and I encourage you all to listen and to share your questions throughout the session. Without further ado, I'm going to present today's speakers. Each will have 15 minutes to share their views on the topics at hand, and we will then move to a moderated panel and Q&A in the second half of the call. Today we have with us Jean-Marie Halleux, professor at the University of Liège in Belgium, Rick Jacobus from Street Level Advisors from the United States, Dev Gatchis, executive director at the Housing Land Trust of the North Bay in California, US, and Jean-Baptiste Debron, head of the housing department at the city of Lille in France. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor now to Jean-Marie, who's going to be our first speaker for today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Edward, for your introduction. So yes, I have prepared a presentation entitled "Land Value Capture and Inclusionary Housing in Europe." Next slide, please. Maybe as a starting point, Edward already mentioned the issue of housing affordability crisis. As a starting point, we can consider the increase in housing price. And here to apprehend this topic, it's useful to consider an important research, a research that was developed by Canal et al. And those researchers, they have been able to get the data for 14 countries. And they also have been able to get a data for a quite long period, you see, from 1870 to 2012. And from their research, we can underline two conclusions. The first one, and I guess it's quite obvious on the figures that you have here, is that the increase in housing price is not something new. It's something old, it's something structural. We have to go back maybe at least to the 1950s. And the second conclusion relates to the fact that housing is actually a combination of both land and construction. And concerning this point, you see here the conclusion of the research. When you look at the period from 1950 to 2012, the increase in housing price can be attributed at 84% to rising land prices. So it means very concretely that there is only 16% left for technical construction cost. Okay, next slide, please. So we have this increase in housing price, which is actually an increase in land prices. And from this point, we can go immediately to this topic of land value capture. So what is land value capture? It's an approach that enables community first to capture land value and secondly to reinvest those land value in public policies. And that can be, for instance, housing policies. In this approach, land value capture, we can consider a kind of, I would say, of moral justification, in the sense that it is this increase in land price is actually the result of the collective action and not so much the result of actions of the landowner. So it is in this sense that we can talk about unearned benefits, and it is in this perspective that it makes sense for the communities to capture this land values. And again, first point is to capture it, and the second point is to reinvest land values in public policies, and that can be, for instance, in housing policies. And here on this slide, you see the various instruments that can be used for land value capture. Well, of course, I do not have time here to discuss all of them, but in relation to the topic of the day, we can discuss developer obligation and inclusionary housing. And in fact, inclusionary housing is a specific approach of developer obligation that is focused to affordable housing. Okay, next slide, please. So, developer obligation, what do we mean exactly by developer obligation? That's contribution required in exchange for administrative decision related to planning. So it can be land use plans, it can be building permits, and those decisions enable the legal development of land project or real estate project. And the contribution, they can be monetary, but they can also be in kind. For instance, it's very common to ask developers to build a road or to build, for instance, a sewage system. So we have developer obligation, and we see that it's actually a growing practice. And there are two key reasons for that. The first reason is that in most contexts, we have, of course, increasing budgetary constraints when we talk about the budget of local authorities, of municipalities. So developer obligation is one way for them to find new source of income. And the second reason is, of course, the rising land price that we have already commented. Because in the perspective of developer obligation, rising land price means an opportunity because the amounts to capture, of course, is more important. So it's a growing practice. Developer obligation is a growing practice, but still we can observe that it remains underused compared to the potential, again, the potential related to the increase in land value. And it remains underused, I would say, for two key reasons. The first one is the influence of interest groups that try to limit the use of this kind of instrument. So we can talk about the development industry or the construction industry. Of course, the developers, they do not appreciate to face those kind of constraints. So that's the first reason that limit the application of developer obligation. And the second one is related to the limited administrative capacity. Administrative capacity in terms of the local planners. For local planners, it's not so easy to apply this because it requires to negotiate with the developers. Okay, next slide, please. So we have land value capture, we have developer obligation, and then thirdly, we have inclusionary housing. So as Edward already mentioned, inclusionary housing relates to affordable housing, and it is also known as inclusionary zoning, and it refers to specific developer obligation imposed to include within a construction project a certain proportion of housing units that are sold or that are rented below market prices. About the origin of inclusionary housing, so we have to go back to the 70s. We have to go back to the 70s in the USA. And when you look at the literature, it's very often that it has been developed firstly in Fairfax County in Virginia. Maybe something that is not so well known for the European audience is that inclusionary housing can also be named inclusionary zoning, in fact, in reaction to exclusionary zoning, as it is expressed in the USA. By exclusionary zoning, we mean social and racial segregation through land use regulation. So inclusionary zoning can be considered as a reaction to this kind of practice. And then since the 70s, we see that it has gradually spread in Europe, but also in other parts of the world, also in some countries in the global south. And when it relates to Europe, we see that its development really started in the 90s with the wave of neoliberalism, with the fact that there are less money available for public funds for housing. So on the one hand, it's becoming more important, but again, it remains, in most contexts, it remains underused. Next slide, please. Some words now about the evaluation of inclusionary housing. In many contexts, it is still a controversial instrument in the sense that, on the one hand, it can be positive in terms of housing affordability, okay? But on the other hand, it might discourage the production of new housing. And if there is a limitation in the supply, of course, that will have an impact on price that could lead to increasing prices, which of course is exactly the opposite result to what is actually expected. So again, it's controversial in the sense that the development industry, the construction industry, put this element as an argument to resist the development of inclusionary housing. And when we look at the research, we see that the effectiveness of inclusionary housing is quite mixed. The results are quite mixed and very much context dependent on how the policy is actually used. And again, when you look at the literature, we can see different reasons that explain the effectiveness of inclusionary housing. The first one, of course, relates to the dynamics of housing markets. If you are in an area with dynamic housing markets, that means high prices. And if we have high housing price, again, it means we have high land prices. So there is a potential for inclusionary housing. And it's in a way a precondition to effective and efficient inclusionary housing. Another point is the expertise within planning authorities. Again, it's necessary for local planners to negotiate with developers, and it's not so easy. Something also very important is the predictability. To be more precise, I mean here the predictability when the developer is going to negotiate with the land owner. The key idea is the developer has to know that they will have to be in charge of inclusionary housing, and they have to integrate that into their negotiation. If it's not the case, then the cost could be supported by the developer, and the aim is that the cost should be supported not by the developer, but should be supported by the land owner. Another result, and I think quite important from the research concerning the effectiveness of inclusionary housing, relates to the length of time a policy has been in place. And we see in the literature that to be mature, inclusionary housing policy require 5 to 7 years for two reasons. First reason, again, is that it requires an expertise in the local planning system. So 5 to 7 years in many contexts are necessary for improving the administrative capacity. That's the first reason. And the second reason relates to the ratchet effect, in the sense that landowners have to get used to the fact that inclusionary housing will have an impact on the amount of money they could receive for their piece of land. And so again, after a few years, then the market is used to this situation, and the landowner can try more easily to accept a decrease in land value. Okay, next slide, please. I would now briefly present a typology concerning the European context in relation to inclusionary housing. I would make a distinction between 4 types of countries. So first type relates to the UK, or maybe more precisely England, which can be considered as the European leader in relation to inclusionary housing. And it is related to what I have mentioned concerning the length of time, because in England we see that this practice is common since the 90s. So they have a quite long experience. And why? Because, of course, they were the first European country, that was the first European country to be influenced by the American practices. And currently in England, we have this instrument called Section 106, which is defined in the Town and Country Planning Act. And you see from recent data from 2023 and 2024, that it is definitely significant in terms of housing production. So you see for those 2 years, inclusionary housing, or more precisely in England, Section 106, actually represent 44% of all affordable housing that were delivered. Okay, next slide, please. About the second type of country, well, we can call them the interventionist states. And here the idea is that in those countries, I take the example here of Sweden. The idea here is that inclusionary housing is not so necessary. There are limited needs for that because they still have a tradition of quite strong land policy, of quite strong social housing policy. So in concrete terms, that means that land for social and affordable housing are still provided by public authorities. So here I make reference to a paper on an article on the Swedish city of Gothenburg, and the conclusion was that in this context, it was not so necessary to develop inclusionary housing because most of the land was available because it was owned by the municipality for new housing development, and also because in this city we still have large public housing companies. So in such context, inclusionary housing is not so necessary. Okay, for the next slide. About the third type, well, we can consider here, I would say, mixed cases. That would relate to most Western European countries like France, like Belgium, like Germany, like Austria. In those countries, we see a significant use of inclusionary housing, but we can consider that, again, it's just like developer obligation, it's probably underutilized compared to the potential, again, related to the increase we have had concerning land values. And then we have a fourth type of country. I'm talking here about former socialist or communist countries in Baltic Europe, Central Europe, also in the Balkans. In those countries, we have seen on the recent years quite a significant increase in housing price, and again, therefore, in land prices. But we see that the local planning system are not yet able to implement inclusionary housing. Okay, next slide, please.
Jean-Marie, you
So
have 1 minute, 1 minute left.
yeah, I reached my conclusion. Yes. First point in my conclusion. So land value capture, developer obligation, inclusionary housing. We see, for instance, with the illustration of England, that it can become commonplace. Again, it can become commonplace because we have this, I would say, potential. We have this opportunity of rising land prices. But still, even if it becomes commonplace, it is important to observe that there are no panacea, in the sense that inclusionary housing is one tool and it has to be integrated in larger planning policies and also in larger housing policies. So land value capture, developer obligation, inclusionary housing, they can become commonplace, but we can consider that in most contexts, they are still underutilized. Again, they are underutilized because it's not so easy for the local planning system to apply it. So we have an issue, again, of administrative capacity. And maybe in more general terms, we have an issue of cognitive blockage, because it's not so easy for the population, but also for the planners, for the decision makers, for the local politicians, and so on, to understand that it is perfectly legitimate for the communities to, again, to capture land values. And again, from this perspective, the stronger needs are probably observed in former socialist and communist countries. And my last point is about the wide variety across countries. Sorry, no, keep on the former one. Is the wide variety across countries, notably in Europe, concerning the complexity of the effective functioning. I hope that I've been clear enough that the key principle is not so complicated, but how it works on the field, we see that it's quite complex to deeply analyze it. So from a research perspective, we need more data, we need more knowledge. Why? Because we need to improve those kind of instruments to make inclusionary housing more efficient. So that would be from a research perspective, but also from a teaching perspective. What we need is more local expertise to actually apply it. So here there is clearly a link with teaching, maybe university teaching, with the idea to strengthen the training of local planners. Okay, this time for the next slide. Maybe I wanted to say that in my slide you will see it, that there is yes, the last one. Thank you. This one, perfect. What the materials I have briefly present here, most of them are taken from recent research on public value capture in Europe. So you have here the reference if you want to go into more details. And I can thank you now for your attention.
Thank you, Jean-Marie. We'll now jump straight to Rick Jacobus, but let me remind everyone that you can share your questions through the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. So Rick, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Howard. I'm Rick Jacobus. Next slide. I'm Rick Jacobus. I'm a consultant. I work with cities, primarily in North America, on housing policy. One of the things I've worked on a lot is inclusionary housing, and I got a chance to write a book about it for the Lincoln Institute. So I got to talk to the people who administer a lot of the inclusionary housing policies in the United States. Next slide. And I'm going to repeat some of what Jean-Marie said because I just think it's so important about land and how the economics work. And I want to start with this question of like, what is it that makes places so much more expensive? Like we really have seen these run-ups in costs, but like what's the underlying problem? And next slide. And I want to point to the fact that the thing that makes places expensive is that we're all working to make them better. Every time you paint a mural or volunteer at your child's school or do anything to improve your community, you make it more desirable to other people, and that pushes the price up. Next slide. And the question that we're struggling with is like when the housing price goes up, everybody pays more, but where does the money go? And I think the main point that you heard Jean-Marie making was it goes to land, right? It's the property, it's the real estate. When the home prices rise, the people who already own homes, their wealth goes up. When rents rise, the people who own apartment buildings, their wealth goes up. Or the people who own land that could be developed into apartment buildings, the value of that land goes up. Next slide. And this wouldn't be a problem if everybody owned land, but we have unequal access to land ownership. Next slide. And in the United States, and this is, we think about this a lot in terms of race. This is a class issue. It's true across race. It's not limited to the consequence in race, but historically, this concept of inclusionary housing sort of came out of recognizing the sort of inequality by race of home ownership and land ownership. And in the United States, white families have 13 times more wealth than families of color. And it's primarily a difference in housing values, home values, and so this is sort of tied up in this problem of access. Next slide. We had a long period of time when governments at all levels, but including the federal government, were actively promoting racial segregation. Next slide. And then we went through a period where we banned that. We overturned that. We fair housing, and we said this is not a fair way to run a society. We want to undo that segregation. Next slide. But at the local level, communities across the United States implemented zoning in such a way as to continue that racial segregation. And so we started to recognize in the 60s a pattern of social and racial exclusion, and really not just race, but also class exclusion in the way that cities were zoned. The rules for what you could build were designed to keep people out. Next slide. And so inclusionary zoning really grew as a response to that, as Jean-Marie said. And the idea was let's zone for inclusion. And now we call it inclusionary housing because sometimes we implement that in mechanisms other than zoning. But the core idea is that we're going to make it a requirement that if you want to build new housing, you're going to build it in such a way that it's socially inclusionary, that it reaches across income levels. Next slide. As Jean-Marie said, the first programs were in suburban Washington, D.C., so outside of D.C., and the jurisdictions there are still requiring that new housing that gets built include a percentage of affordable units. So Fairfax County, which is the first program, still requires 12.5% of any new housing be rented at below market rents to lower income residents. Next slide. I just want to tell a few other stories of how these programs work in the United States because there's quite a lot of variety and they're very different contexts and very different ways that this same tool gets used. So this is Austin, Texas, and the city of Austin owned the airport and they decommissioned the airport. They built a new airport and they had this large swath of land in the center of the city, which is a common problem. And they decided to build a new neighborhood. Next slide. And so they built 4,600 homes, they built apartments, they open space, a commercial, shopping center. They built an entirely new urban community. Next slide. And they made a decision early on that 25% of the housing would be permanently affordable for low and moderate income families. And so that means some of the apartments and some of the homes and some of the townhomes, and they have a range of housing types that they have built into this project. And they required the builders who came in and accessed the city's land to build and to sell or rent at these prices. And it was a precondition of the development. Next slide. And the result of that is that they've built this new community in a way that's permanently economically diverse and racially diverse as a result. So 1,400 families earning between 50 and 80% of the median income for the area now get to live in this brand new, it's not brand new anymore, but it was brand new when it opened. And it's the kind of integration that doesn't happen in most American cities because the new housing costs too much. A new neighborhood is too expensive. Next slide. A very different context. Breckenridge, Colorado, which is a ski resort town in the mountains in Colorado. Like a lot of the resort towns, they had trouble with local workforce being able to live in the town. Any housing that was available, people wanted to use, as ski housing, as vacation housing. Next slide. So they built a program that required the creation of affordable homes when developers built new vacation homes. And they now have 600 permanently affordable homes. It's probably more than that since I made this slide. And 32% of the town's permanent year-round workforce live in these homes that were created by this program. And this is how they ensure that they have diversity in their community and that the people who work there can actually afford to live there. Next slide. So there are about 1,000 inclusionary housing programs across the United States. You can see from this map that they're concentrated in the areas that are the highest cost, high growth areas on the coasts, California, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts. But they're also scattered throughout the rest of the country in the sort of pockets of high cost. Next slide. The tool gets used in a range of different contexts, as I've shown with these stories, but you see it most in the sort of big high cost cities, but also in the growing suburbs where there's new suburban development. Often we're seeing inclusionary housing policies working. Resort towns and college towns, even in communities, even in parts of the country where you don't see a lot of high cost, there's high cost pressure in those communities, and as a result, they've turned to this tool. Next slide. Where it doesn't work is places that aren't building new housing. Because inclusionary is piggybacking on the market rate housing production, we don't see it working everywhere. There's lots of parts of the United States where there's not new housing construction underway or not underway at any significant scale. And adopting a complicated inclusionary housing program isn't going to help them with their housing solutions because the market isn't there to build the new housing. This is a tool for redirecting some of the power of a strong housing market, but you have to first have a strong housing market. Next slide. There are very big differences from one program to the next, and people who are designing these programs or implementing the programs have to wrestle with a lot of different policy choices. And the first one is the sort of set aside requirement. What percent of the units in a new development have to be affordable? What income level are we going to target? Should it be deeply affordable or just a little bit under market? Big choices around incentives. Do we make it worth the developer's while? Do we try to offset some of the cost, or do we simply require it? There's programs that are voluntary as well as the mandatory programs I've been describing, where the developer's just encouraged to include affordable units. And then there's a whole set of choices about like, do we let a developer pay a fee rather than provide the units on site, or can they build the affordable units off site at a different location? Next slide. I'm just going to mention a couple of those things. And if there are questions, please ask them and we can try to address them later. But the set aside requirement, you see that most American programs have 10 to 20% requirements. So some are lower than 10%, a few are higher than 20%, but most are in that range. And what we've seen is a trend toward lower requirements as the cost of construction has gone up. The surpluses available for inclusionary have been going down. Next slide. The one of the biggest differences between different American programs is the degree to which they provide incentives. In some places, the inclusionary requirement is just a straightforward requirement. You must build 20% affordable and end of story. In other places, there's a package of incentives, the biggest one being density bonus. We allow you to build a bigger, taller, more dense building if you include affordable units. Or in some cases, we require you to build the affordable units, but we give you in exchange the right to build more. There's also incentives around how fast we process your planning approvals, or in some cases, it's even tax subsidies. We're going to waive some portion of your property tax if in exchange for providing the affordable housing. The more incentives we offer, the higher the requirement can be and still be economically feasible. So there's a reason to provide incentives even when the program is fully mandatory. Like you have to build it, but still incentives allow us to mandate a higher level. Next slide. We have also this choice about voluntary and mandatory, and both programs seem to work, and also both programs seem to fail. The key to success doesn't come down to this. Next slide. I just want to mention a few of the challenges next. The big one is that it's politically controversial. In every place where we have inclusionary, we have a fight about inclusionary. The development community does not like this policy. The landowning community does not like this policy. And so there's always a political conflict. Next slide. The conflict often centers around economic feasibility. Are we requiring too much? Next slide. And the key thing to recognize is that this policy only works when housing gets built. And it is absolutely clear in the literature that in some communities, the requirements have been high enough that they have held back development. So it's important that the requirement be fine-tuned, or at least tuned to the local conditions, and not that we don't require too much, because if we require too much, we get nothing. Next slide. I'm going to skip this. Jean-Marie covered some of the research. Next slide. The key thing is to recognize that the most impactful inclusionary programs are the ones where the most market rate development is happening, that the rate of requirement, whether it's 10% or 20%, is not nearly as important as how much housing is getting built in general in the community. Next slide. So people sometimes want to see a tension between the inclusionary and the sort of goal of building more abundant housing, but there's not really a tension. It only really works in this way, and which we sort of call the grand bargain. But the idea is we're going to build more places that people want to live, and that's going to boost demand to live here, and that's going to push prices up. We're going to make it easier to build abundant housing so people can build market rate housing that's going to push prices down generally and help serve the need for middle class housing, but it doesn't reach the need for low income housing generally. We don't build enough. And so then we're going to require that we provide some support for low income housing, either by including the units or by capturing a fee, that's going to happen to serve the low income housing portion of the market. Next slide. And when you think about this in terms of land value, what you see is that the first thing, like making a better community, pushes land values up. All those things we all do are pushing land values up. When we make it easier to build more abundant housing, which we need to do, we're also pushing land values up. If we can build more apartments, the land that they might sit on is worth more money. And then having pushed the land values up so high, we have an opportunity to capture some of that increase in value and direct it to affordable housing. We don't get that opportunity without first doing those first two things. And the inclusionary policy has to be seen as part of a broader strategy for affordability that includes making it possible to build market rate housing. Next slide. Um, so this is really, it's fair to see inclusionary as a way of capturing that land value that we're generating. Next slide. And as I just decided to include this, Jean-Marie said this, but I think it's really important to see that the predictability of the requirements is the key to having the landowners be the ones that pay the cost. The inclusionary gets capitalized into land values only when it's stable and predictable. So we have to have what's much better is to have a stable, modest requirement and keep it in place for decades than to have the highest possible requirement during the boom times and then have to repeal it when the market comes down. So next slide. Um, I want to mention that the I think this is obvious from what we've all said so far, but the way this works is really different from place to place. And I've worked in a number of American cities and also in Canada. I had the opportunity to work a little bit in South Africa, and I know there's some people from South Africa on the call today. And I just can't overstate how very much the local housing conditions change the nature of these programs. And so thinking about the housing market and the nature of development cost and the way that land is regulated, the capacity of local government, and lastly, like the political structure in any given place really change how a tool like this will work. So that if you're trying to adapt an inclusionary policy to your context, you can't just take the policy from somewhere else and paste it in. There's a lot of work that goes into thinking about like how do we generalize from the idea and apply it here. Next slide. I'm just about finished. Um, the last thing I want to mention is just that the challenge of administering one of these programs is significant. Many places can benefit from inclusionary, but don't because they don't have the local tools to manage the relationships with developers, to negotiate the terms, to enforce the terms after they've been negotiated. And one of the big issues is long-term stewardship. That we're building housing, we're requiring the creation of housing, and we want to keep it affordable for a very long time. And that requires ongoing monitoring, working with homeowners, managing the sale of homes, managing the re-rental of rental units. Next slide. And we have a lot of different approaches to how to do that. And one of the key ideas for this webinar is that when we've surveyed local programs in the United States around these administrative capacity issues, one of the standout observations is that a handful of governments, most governments do it themselves, some outsource it, but among the entities that they outsource to are community land trusts. And in our surveys, we found that those programs are better run, that the community land trusts are sort of a natural fit with inclusionary housing because they seem to specialize in exactly the thing that the housing programs need most, which is that sort of long-term management of this asset. We're going to create a public asset by requiring developers to set aside units, but those developers have no interest or very limited interest in managing affordable housing. And the local governments respond by trying to set rules, but no amount of rules are really going to get the job done. You need people to monitor. Next slide. So this is just to sort of segue to Dev's presentation. We did a report that came out last year that the International Center for CLTs published with the Lincoln Institute. And there's a chapter about where inclusionary housing and community land trusts have been sort of paired together. And we profile a number of programs, including DEVs, that are community land trusts that are administering inclusionary housing programs. And it's like both a great fit from the inclusionary point of view, but also a great fit from the land trust point of view because it creates a supply of homes that they don't have to go out and fundraise for. So I'll wrap up there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rick. We'll just go straight to Dev since we're running a bit late. So Dev, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So thanks for the setup, Rick. So I am Dev Getches, serve as executive director and run a community land trust in California, USA. Next slide. We are in Sonoma County and in Napa County, and we have 152 homes in our program. We've housed 191 families. Out of the 152 homes, 131 of those are inclusionary units, and we have another 100 or so in the pipeline. Next. As a steward in the community, one of the challenges is to work with local government and create the case to have the political will as to why they should do inclusionary housing and partner with a CLT. We want to communicate that eliminating the need for government and private subsidies in future years as units are resold is an excellent investment. If there's any subsidy, we want to tie it to the unit, not the family. And we want to maintain income-targeted housing stock. The community land trust model allows us to create community wealth and personal wealth while maintaining future affordability. Next. How we structure the partnership with the city, the developer, and the housing land trust is to create a very simple structure where everyone does what they do best and stays in their lane and overlaps when necessary to move the project forward. The city has an inclusionary housing policy requiring new development to contribute 15 to 20% of the homes to be sold at market rate pricing. So they have a policy. The CLT brings staff capacity to the city. We call ourselves adjunct staff. We ensure that the criteria that the city has set for the home is in place, such as income levels, and then we steward the process of qualifying the buyer and essentially guaranteeing the sale, and then staying in contact, stewarding the buyer through the time that they're owners, and then managing the resale and repeating the process. The developer does what they do best. They build the home, and when it's ready, they sell the home to the buyer that we qualify. Next. The process for partners is essentially a developer comes into town, they want to build a market rate subdivision, and the city says, great, we have this policy, go talk to the land trust. We write a simple MOU with just bullet points, who's going to do what, how many units, what income level, and then the regulatory agreements are drafted by us in partnership with the city attorneys, and then the developer submits an application for the project. We are part of the team with the developer and the city. So when the developer presents on the project and the piece of the inclusionary housing comes up, we go up and present to city council on that particular piece of the project. While the developer is building, we are doing marketing and outreach to local employers, local workforce, and so on, and we qualify buyers. The developer is building the units, and at the close of escrow, we all meet. Next. And at the close of escrow, we bifurcate the land. The price of the home is tied to the income level, and the house is owned by the buyer. The land is set aside as a community asset forever, and the only use for that land is that the house that sits on it will be affordable to someone in the community. The land is leased to the homeowner who owns the home. Next. So at the close of escrow, this is how it works. The developer generally donates the land to the city deeds the land to us, and we hold the land in trust as a community benefit. We then lease the land to the family. The family enters into a 99-year renewable ground lease. They have exclusive rights to the property, just like ownership. And they agree to sell to someone in the same income level to keep the home affordable in perpetuity. The developer sells the house directly to the family we've qualified. The family owns the home and has a 30-year fixed mortgage. Next. In the case of condominiums, we have a document that is an affordability covenant. We call it a declaration that reflects the ground lease, and the family enters into that 90-year declaration. They have exclusive rights to the property as owners, and they agree to sell the home to someone in the same income level, so we can keep it affordable in perpetuity. And again, the developer sells the home directly to the qualified family, who then will have a 30-year fixed mortgage. Next. So we've had challenges. We've been doing this for 23 years, And in the beginning, when we had inclusionary homes and we're all together in a row, over the years, we have negotiated with developers and cities and eventually putting into the inclusionary policy that the homes are required to be scattered throughout the development. So whenever the policy comes up for review, we put more teeth into it and ask for a little bit more. Next. So now our homes are all scattered, and more recently, we have the floor plans and the elevations, the look and the architecture of the homes that are the same as inclusionary. And some of the homes that used to be set aside for inclusionary are now actually part of the market rate home. For example, we used to have duets, and now those are both for market rate and the land trust. So it's really quite indistinguishable which homes are the inclusionary homes. They are truly inclusionary now. Next. So making the case for truly inclusionary homes, the architecture again of floor plans should be the same as market rate homes. What we ask for from our developers is that the market rate homes look the same on the outside, and then the interior finishes have also been a challenge. And now the baseline is that the interiors of the inclusionary homes are the exact same packet that the market rate homes have as their basic packet. Next. Stewardship matters. We are in this with our families. We are here to provide monitoring, support, and continuous education to keep the family securely housed, which proved to be the case during the Great Recession. Nationally, community land trusts had 1/8 of the foreclosure, and it turns out that stewardship had everything to do with it. People need someone to call, they need to be supported, and the education made all the difference. We didn't lose a single home during the Great Recession. In fact, we had numerous resales because this model is very strong in a hot and cold market because it's tied to incomes and not the appraised market value. Next. Ask us not how many homes we have. Ask a CLT how many families we serve. Next. So we have several homes that have had multiple resales. I don't know why my lovely family photos are not showing, but trust me, they're lovely families. And as an example, one of our homes has been sold to 4 subsequent buyers, and the home has remained as affordable to the 4 subsequent buyers as it was to the initial buyer, thus housing 5 families without any additional subsidy whatsoever. Next. So, big question. Do CLTs give homeowners a chance to build equity? And the answer, now that we've had 39 resales, is yes. So our homeowners will stay in their home for an average of 7 years, which is the same as market rate. Homeowners have on average sold their homes for $63,322 more than what they bought it for. And upon selling their home at the close of escrow from the closing documents, they have walked away with an average of $114,873 in total equity, which often goes toward the purchase of a market rate home. An argument for employers and cities is we need a way to recruit and retain our local workforce. Stop renting, start owning, be stewarded, be secure, and then use your equity to buy a market rate home. And we have not lost our workforce that way. Because it's tied to income, it continues to be affordable for generations to the workforce. Next. Key points for city leaders to show what can be accomplished in partnership with a CLT. They're ambassadors. They have to explain to everybody else why they support this. So make it easy. Give them talking points. They're partnering with a nonprofit in a CLT to steward a finite resource that is land that serves as a permanent subsidy to individual families, generation after generation. They're making affordable homeownership a reality in our community. We're delivering stewardship to families to ensure successful homeownership, not just build it and walk away. Stay engaged. We're creating community wealth by preserving land that will benefit the community in perpetuity, and we are strengthening the fabric of our community by providing a secure place to live. Next. I want to thank you for your attention. Here are some of our families, and we're delighted to take any questions.
Thank you, Deb. We do have some questions for you on the Q&A. We'll try to answer them later. So we'll go now to Jean-Baptiste, our last speaker for the day, and then we'll move on to moderated panel. Jean-Baptiste, the floor is yours.
It's okay. Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I thank you for the invitation. I show you how in Lille, in a city in France, we develop social diversity with an inclusionary zoning tool. Next, I think it's very simple presentation of the French administration in terms of for housing development. We need to combine three levels: the national, the metropolitan level, and the city level. I work for the city level, and my role is to implement the social mixed city program in all the cities. Next. I think it's okay for this, for that. The city of Lille is a little city near to 14,000 inhabitants. It is local in between London, Amsterdam, Brussels, and Paris. But it's also a big conurbation for more than 1 million inhabitants. And our context is very specific because we have got 27 social housing, majority of low-income families, but also a lot of urban heritage, vacant home, derelict zone, pollution of the land. But we observe we are also a big student city, and we observe an increase of our land prices. And also the rental market prices is also very higher in comparison of other city in France at the same scale. Next, with our elected people have developed a policy of social mixity since 2008, and we are 20 years later, and our main tools is an inclusionary urban planning regulation tool. Next. In France, we've got the French law allows the cities to define zones, different zones, when it's possible to deliver permissions with affordable part of affordable housing, social homes, but also ownership homes. In 2009, the city of Lille decided to use this tool. And is completed also by an obligation to build proportions of homes to families, 2 and more bedrooms. It's very important because our elected people want to maintain families in the city, in the core of the metropolitan area. The city of Lille has also established the definitions of affordable housing in observations of the price of the marketplace, because we have got a lot of low-income peoples, and it's very important to put the good price to allow the families to buy homes. And the city also develops some subsidies to promote this type of homes with anti-speculation requirements. Next. Very quickly, this is the map of the city of Lille. We are defined 3 zones. Next. And in this zone, we define different type of social mixity. The blue zones, we observe that there are no social homes. There are deficit of social housing. So our main objective is to develop social homes. We've got through threshold, but it's not the main principal informations. In the yellow zone, we could mix our obligations. In the red zone, the priority is to social ownerships. And all the developers of the social landlords to obtain a permit need to negotiate with me to precise what type of homes they are allowed to develop. And as you see, the main objective is to 45% of affordable homes in the blue zone. Next. This will be a long process. This is a timeline between 29 to today in 2026. The first program are developed in very soon, 20 years ago. But also our elected people have observed that all the subsidies that put on the different the operations is it serve only the first owners, for example, not and the first owner sometimes, despite the anti-speculative clause, benefit from a capital gains, and they decide to transform our tool with a CLT. Next. This, the name of the CST is the Organisme de Foncier Solidaire de la Métropole Lilloise. This is the first CLT that agreed in France in 2017. Next. The city of Lille and the metropolis of Lille, but also other federation partnership have developed a partnership with developers to develop CLT homes in all the city. Next. Very quickly, there are some criteria way to define all the beneficiaries in terms of income and in terms of occupations of the homes. Next. And at these times, we have started in 2020 with the 2 first operations. Now we have got more than 100 homes delivered and also 60 homes in development. And we expect to develop 150 homes per year in objective. The price is very low in comparisons of the free market. The price at this time is at 2,500 euro per meter square, and the market price is is near 5,000 euro per meter square. We will use a long-term lease that called the bail réel solidaire between 60 and 19 years renewal. And the rental price is very low, 60 to 1 euro per meter square per month. Sorry. I haven't got a very good English accent. Sorry. Next, very quickly, the portfolio of type of operation. The ownership, the CLT homes is only a part of big operation. For example, the first operation on the left of the slide, it's 2010 housing units. 60% was affordable, a lot of social homes because this operation is in the core of the city of Lille, but there are only 15 CLT homes. Next, a lot of operation of programs is collective in our urban context, and the CLT homes is a part of operations. Next. In the right of the slide, we are also a first operation of existing dwellings. We buy some vacant homes, and we develop housing in CLT models. Next. Next is good. And I think it's a lot of operation, but I would like to conclude. Next. Our CLT is now in competition with other CLT in the metropolitan area, and it's not very easy because there's not the national price is very higher than the local price. For example, our price is 2,500 euro per meter square, and the national level is near 4,000 euro per meter square. So we think this is not for people. So we don't want that the other CLT develop programs in our metropolitan area. Next. We are defined some new zone of development of CLT, and the metropolitan organization decide to give us 1 million euro per year until 2028 to develop homes in the blue zone. So we are reinforce our development. And next, I think next. I think I need to yes, the issues that are observed actually the dialogue with developers is more difficult since 2020 due to the rising of the construction cost and also the increase of the environmental obligations. So there are a lot of constraints, and the discussion, the negotiation with the developers is more difficult than 10 years ago. They don't like all the requirements that the city of Lille imposed. The proportion of affordable housing, the price, the capped sale price. And also, we would like we want that this price, the more lower is it possible, and the developer wants us to increase the price to, for example, near than 3,000 euro, but is not the same people. Is not. The family of Lille don't buy a CLT home if the price is at this level. So what I am observed that the system of the social mixity or inclusionary zoning depend of the equalizing the profit. The social mix between rental market and affordable homes. And for us, it's not a problem that the rental market help us to buy or develop some affordable homes. We observe also that the government has decided recently to cut some private rental investments. So our production is in this moment very low. It's very difficult to develop new operations, and we at city and the metropolis have decided to maintain our subsidies to imbalance the operation, to maintain productions of affordable homes. And to conclude, we are our models. The city is a member of the CLT. The city of Lille launched the CLT. So this our CLT is very linked to our local housing policy. And it's finished, and I'm sorry for my English.
Thank you very much, Jean-Baptiste. Thanks to all speakers. We have gotten a lot and very interesting questions, so we're going to try to address some of them now during this panel discussion with all the speakers. I'm going to ask that all speakers be shown on screen, if that is possible, at the same time for the discussion. Before I move on to some of the questions, I want to remind everyone that the recording of this session, as well as the presentations and the transcript, are going to be made available to all attendees. We're going to send instructions and some of the materials through an email, and you'll get all the information that you need from there. I'm going to now try to cover some of the questions. I'm going to try to put some of them together in order to try to cover as much as possible. So my first question would be to Deb and Jean-Baptiste, really about this intersect between CLTs and inclusionary zoning. Do you think that these two can work together so that CLTs are actually making IZ more effective and viable? And there was also a question about the ability to scale for greater impact. Do you think that CLTs can help IZ become much more relevant in terms of general numbers of production of affordable housing? Dev, if you want to go first.
Well, I think we can scale the impact of creating more affordable housing if we have political will, and there is zero cost to cities to do that. So we had a case here where cities used to fund affordable housing and use redevelopment money, and that funding source went away, and affordable housing opportunities fell completely apart. So at zero cost to the cities, when you have an area where development is something that builders are motivated by because they can make so much money with the market rate homes, and then you have the density bonuses and fee waivers and things like that, then I think you can have very good response. We have gotten to the point where developers enjoy doing this because there is social capital that they gain as well as the good guys. Even though it's required, they're viewed in the community as an entity that is actually giving and helping to improve. So there's different ways to, I guess, to calculate the gains.
Jean-Baptiste, would you say that the municipalities and cities can also play a role in making those two work together, CLTs and IZ?
My audio. In our local context, there are a very strong link between the city and the community land trust. The city of Lille is a member of the community land trust, and for us, we are a land trust. I think the community is not our main objective because for elected people, the main objective is to permit to allow the families to rester to maintain like citizens. For the elected people, the importance is the families is citizens. So if they live in the city with the good conditions, is very important for our elected people. I don't know if you understand what I mean, but this is not the city is a community. Okay, this is the scale of the community for our elected people, and the community, the CLT models in France is a tool of housing policies, and in our context, because the city of Lille have a lot of tradition of is a socialist municipality since more than 100 years. So the develop during the more than 100 years, social diversity, maintain the workers in the city, and so on. And our objective is to link our housing policies to a tool, our community land trust, or organisme de foncier solidaire, and this type of models securing our public investments now, because all the subsidies that put on the CLT is for one generation, but 2 generations, 3 generations, and so on. And there's our convictions. But for example, in another city that there are no objective to develop CLT, sometimes the CLT is made by developers, but also social landlords. And this is not the same models. We think that our models is more efficient. That's a model, for example, in the Biarritz in France, for example. It is a city, very touristical city, and is not the same. The elected people have not an objective to develop housing social diversity, for example.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Jean-Baptiste.
Too long.
Moving on to another topic that some of the people were asking about is the incentive questions for developers. So I would want to ask Rick and Jean-Marie about whether there are other incentives that don't rely on the unit requirement itself or lowering the amount of affordable housing units, but rather on other types of incentives. And some of you already mentioned them, but if you could highlight those for the audience.
Sure, I'll go first if that's right. I mentioned a range of incentives. None of them require or rely on lowering the on-site requirement. The question is, how can we raise it? What can we do with the incentive that makes it possible to require more affordable housing? And the biggest is the density bonus. If we let builders build more units overall, they can spread the cost of the affordable units over a greater number of units, and that's the number one incentive in the United States. The other incentives that we've been seeing a lot of response to lately is relief from various planning requirements. And so in California, we have a state law that allows developers to override local rules for things like the way open space is treated on a site, or how the other structural questions in the code, or process issues. So often in an American context, a developer has to go to a public hearing with their project, and even if their project meets all of the written rules that the jurisdiction has, the public opposition might result in big changes or big delays, both of which are very costly. And so we've been offering developers the ability to skip the public hearings as long as they meet all of the published rules of the written rules of the jurisdiction. They can have their project approved if they include affordable housing. And if they don't include affordable housing, they have to go through that process. And it turns out the cost savings uh, from that process change are enough to make it worth the while for developers to voluntarily provide affordable housing units. That's just a sign of how bad our public process is. But those are meaningful incentives to developers.
Jean-Marie, do you want to add something from the European perspective?
Maybe we could discuss briefly the topic again of predictability. Uh, uh, for the developer, it's very important to know exactly what the authorities will ask. This is true for developer obligation. This is true for inclusionary housing, but also for the kind of developments, which is not always very clear. So that relates to potential conflicts with the living communities. And so the idea is to be as clear as possible so that, again, that would require some expertise in terms of planning, of strategic planning. So the idea is again to limit, well, we in the literature we can talk about transaction cost, because for the developer, transaction cost that might mean more times, and more times mean more financial cost, more expenses, and so on. So to be as clear as possible to prepare what they will be able to develop. And maybe also in relation to that, and I think that was also one starting point of the event today, is again to make a distinction between land and construction. So maybe we should help the developer in terms of land policy. I wouldn't say, I don't say that giving them the land, but that the land is ready for development so that they can be active on construction. Maybe have more regulation for land, including those topic of inclusionary housing, but that the market is maybe more adapted to the phases of construction, against to limit transaction cost and to limit bad surprises for the developers.
Thank you, Jean-Marie. There were also some questions about IZ and CLTs in less suitable contexts, so to speak. So people were asking about how they could be implemented in renovations of existing buildings and structures, also in rural settings or shrinking towns where new construction is not as dynamic. And then there were also questions about housing tenures. So CLTs in the US are mostly in home ownership, but there are also cases of rentals, cooperative, multifamilies. So if you could touch on those topics a little bit,
Maybe I
any of
can
the
say,
speakers.
maybe I can say a word about as you said, the difficult context. Well, I just come back to my key idea, is that inclusionary housing is actually an instrument of land value capture. So you need land value. You need an increase in
Mhm.
land value. And in the Q&A, there is one question asking, okay, can we use inclusionary housing for regeneration and so and not only for greenfield development? The key difference is not between greenfield development and previously developed land. It relates to land value. So we have, for instance, on former brownfield, high density, which means that the land value will strongly increase. Then there is a potential for, again, in general, land value capture, and in particular to inclusionary housing. So the key variable, I would say, what is necessary is to have land value, to have increase in land value.
Rick, do you want to add something about CLTs, maybe not necessarily related to IZ on rural
Sure.
and less prominent markets?
Sure. I mean, I think in the American context, inclusionary housing policies tend to produce more rental housing than home ownership. Where we see the connection to CLTs is strongest is in when we're producing home ownership. So if you look at the region around where Dev's organization exists, it makes sense that the CLT partnership is strongest in the North Bay because that's where most of the inclusionary is producing home ownership. but the inclusionary policies in San Francisco or Oakland or the bigger urban areas are, larger apartment buildings, and there's not been as much role for the land trust there. Though there are a number of land trusts that are stewarding rental units through inclusionary as well as home ownership, and the general idea applies, but the power of the land trust model in home ownership is just, it's just very present for people. In rural, someone asked about inclusionary in rural communities. It's difficult for small communities to implement because there's so many moving parts. There are a few states that have created state frameworks, that make it easier to implement inclusionary in a small community. And then the rural communities that do the most are resort communities or other places where there's some college towns where there's a really specific reason why home prices are very high or housing costs are very high. And in those places, you also tend to have more administrative capacity in the local government. But the typical rural community struggles to implement inclusionary. And so a CLT partnership could be a very powerful help. I'm not aware of great examples for that right now. And just lastly, on the renovations, most of the inclusionary programs only apply to new construction, as Jean-Marie was pointing out. There's no inherent reason why it couldn't apply in renovations. It's just that we have an incentive as local government to encourage the renovation. And with new development, we're in a stronger position to say we're going to condition your right to build. We tend not to want to condition the right to renovate a dilapidated building. We want it renovated enough that it's hard to extract land value.
Jeff, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the inclusionary units that our cities have in their existing housing stock are not under the CLT model. They're under a shorter affordability period. So what we also do is we convert the existing housing stock into CLT homes so that we don't have to start from scratch, right? Recycle all the investment and we turn the silent second, the subsidy into a permanent grant to write down the price. In those cases, the homes are old. And so we negotiate with the city and say, all right, you're going to have to put some money in. We get another nonprofit where their mission is to do renovations for, low-income families and such. And so you've got two nonprofits at work, they renovate, and then we take it over and keep it affordable. So that's cheaper for cities as well to preserve the existing housing stock in that case.
Thank you. And then on the topic of building typology, I understand that in California, you're mostly doing single families or detached or semi-detached, but in Lille, Jean-Baptiste, you're doing multifamily for sale CLT type housing. Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct, but we develop condominiums,
Right.
collective homes, and in this operation, we've got 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms. We also for have a permit. The developers need to develop affordable homes, but also homes for families. When they create 3 homes, then have the obligations to develop 1 home for families in terms of proportion. So, and when they develop more than 15 homes, they need to develop 50% of home from families, 2 bedrooms and more. In our context, the majority of our productions is collective, is not individual. So we only have 9 individual homes on more than 200 CLT homes that we have produced during 10 years.
Okay, thank you. So we've run out of time. I'm sorry we couldn't cover more of the questions. I think we covered some of them to a great length. I want to thank all speakers for sharing your knowledge and your insights on this relevant topic today. I also want to thank the International Center for Community Land Trusts and the European CLT Network for hosting this event. The potential for combining IZ and CLTs has been demonstrated, I believe. I look forward to seeing more policy practice in this area in the near future. I also encourage all attendees to check out the European CLT Network's impact report on its website, which actually highlights some of these best practices that have been presented today. I also want to let you know again that this presentation and the recording are going to be made public in the next few days. And also that an automated exit survey will pop up on your screens when we end the session. So feel free also to share your feedback and suggestions for the future in the exit poll. Thanks again, and have a nice day, evening for those of us in Europe and Africa. See you soon.